Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am really excited because I am responding to a tag that has to do with both tarot and books. There have been a few lately that are great that I intend to make VRs to. This is the one that I got to kind of finishing a plan for first, so here I am with a VR to Lennan Smith and her tag Books for the Majors. I'll tag Lennan's video below so you can go check it out if you haven't seen her video already. Basically, as Books for the Majors suggests, it involves picking a book to represent or to go with or that reminds you of each of the major arcana cards. So I really liked in Lennan's video how she was just sitting in front of a bookshelf and pulling books off the shelf to go with each card. My books are in a couple of different places in the house, so I didn't feel like I could film it like that very well, but I wanted to kind of embrace that spirit of just grabbing things off my shelf that suited the prompts. So I've gone with all books that I actually have physical copies of and just kind of went around my house picking each one in the order of the majors. I really liked that approach. I'm going to try to not make this very, very, very long. Obviously, you know, there's quite a lot of major arcana cards, and you know, if I spend 3 minutes on each, then we're going to be past an hour. I'm going to try to spend a little less than that. Some of the pairings that I ended up with are going to be very obvious as to why, because they're very literal. Others will not be so obvious and require a little bit more explanation. I am not going to timestamp cards below. You can bounce around the video as you wish, but I didn't want to put any spoilers. So here we go. Without further ado, the Fool is first. And the Fool was a very easy pick, and the first book that I thought of immediately was The Good Soldier Švejk by Jaroslav Hašek. And this is a Czech author. It's a book that is set in the First World War. And this one describes Švejk, in the little description at the front, as the spirit of comic endurance necessary to withstand the manglings of a modern-day bureaucratic war machine. It's considered by many to be one of the first, or if not the first, anti-war novel, and Švejk is foolish. He gets into all sorts of jams and all sorts of tricky situations because of his foolishness. Maybe he's foolish, maybe he's a genius saboteur. You know, there's a lot of situations that are a bit ambiguous in that way. So Švejk's foolishness came to me first as a book for The Fool. And you will see my genres are all over the place here. I did not pick like all fiction or anything. I just went to the first thing that came to mind for each one. For The Magician, I picked Sigil Witchery by Laura Tempest Zakroff. I've talked about this book before. It's great. You know, and this reminds me of The Magician because it is, for me, you know, this kind of sigil work is a kind of magic that gets things done using tools that I have in front of me pretty much all the time. And so for that reason, I think it makes a great magician book. You know, it's an activity, it's magic related, and it, you know, uses tools to get stuff done as the magician does. The High Priestess, I picked Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. I adore this book. I have talked about this book in quite a few different videos at this point. Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a poet, brilliant poet, who, you know, looks at the lives and behaviors and family structures and survival strategies of marine mammals and, you know, draws from that so much wisdom. And so there's, you know, it's a book that is watery, it's a book that is intuitive, it is a book that is deep, it is a book that you know, is really, really powerful. And so, you know, this watery book for High Priestess, I think, is Perfect. For the Empress, I chose Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer, another book that I really, really love. I think of the Empress, and I think of being out in nature and the kind of sensory experience of being out in nature, and like feet in the dirt, in the grass, which I just got to have my bare feet outside this past weekend, and it made me so happy after so much snow here and so much cold. And this is another, very, very wise book about, it's about a lot of things, but certainly thinking about humans' relationship with, other animals and other aspects of nature, and the problematics of that relationship and those relationships. This is a book that grapples with that, right down to the level of the language we use to talk about, beings of other species and plants and things like this. It's a really, really great book as well, and I think a good Empress pick. For the Emperor, I picked A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, The Mathematical Archetypes of Nature, Art, and Science, A Voyage from 1 to 10, by Michael S. Schneider. This is an interesting book that, deals with how different numbers and numerical patterns and different shapes are present in nature. And everything from kind of bee honeycombs to the insides of seeds. There's a little bit on, architecture, all different things. And so it says it explores the mathematical principles made visible in flowers, shells, crystals, plants, and the human body, expressed in the symbolic language of folk sayings, fairy tales, myth, and religion, art, and architecture. So I wanted to, insofar as the Empress and the Emperor form a kind of pair, these are both looking at nature in different ways, in very different ways. This one is really interested in structures, though, and patterns. And that, to me, speaks to aspects of the Emperor that are related to those things in terms of, building a structure, maintaining structures, boundaries, things like this. So that one seemed like a good Emperor pick to me. Next is the Hierophant. And for the Hierophant, I picked a novel. And I picked the novel Family by Ba Jin. And this is a novel that is set in China in the 1920s. And the reason that I think of this as a Hierophant book is because it deals a lot with tradition and, feeling some loyalty to tradition or investment in tradition, but also wanting to rebel against tradition in some ways or redefine it. It follows a family and multiple generations of a family, but particularly is focused on brothers, 3 brothers, who have kind of different degrees of, staying close to the traditions of the family versus kind of going their own ways. And, this is set in a kind of cultural moment where these kinds of questions are really prominent as well. And so, I think in the ways that the Hierophant deals with these kind of religious structures and lineages in some instances, insofar as it's a card that gets called the Pope. It's a card that I think is tricky for a lot of people. I think that this one explores, some of the questions that the Hierophant brings up as a card. And it's a really good novel. It's really, really good. I don't know that this is in print. I feel like I got this very inexpensively and secondhand. It may be out of print. But it's fabulous. If you haven't read this, I would say definitely to check it out. The Lovers. The Lovers, Lovers is my birth card, actually. And for The Lovers, I tried to pick a book that went to both love in The Lovers and also the aspects of The Lovers that are more to do with choice and making ethical choices and, all of these different things that The Lovers encompasses. And I ended up with Anarchism and Sexuality, Ethics, Relationships, and Power, which is an anthology edited by Jamie Heckard and Richard Clemenson. And I really like this book. You'll see a bit of a theme in my book selection with this and some of the others. Shared themes that are the books that come off of this bookshelf that deal with my my academic work and my publishing work, which deals with anarchist thinking. And this is a book that it goes all over the place. It gets into political theory. It gets into there's an interview with Judith Butler in here. There's some contemporary movement stuff in here. There's work on Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, Samuel Delany in here. This is a book that thinks about sexuality and politics and sexuality. I think it thinks about the kind of problematics of trying to distinguish the personal and the political in various kinds of ways. And what is kind of like love in a political context, right? And so this is a book that I really like, and inevitably it's an anthology, so I feel differently about different parts of it, but this feels very Lovers to me in terms of multiple aspects of what the Lovers card can relate to. I don't exactly have a lot of romance novels in my house. That would have, I think, been probably the obvious place to go for a Lovers card, but I'm working with what I have. The Chariot. I think of the Chariot as being a card that relates to willfulness, a card that relates to how we orient in the world, how we steer in the world through and around obstacles, how we, direct ourselves, all of the, control, like all of these things that are related to the Chariot for me. And that led me to one of my favorite, books and one of the most important books to me, Living a Feminist Life by Sarah Ahmed. This is a wonderful book that deals with feminism in everyday life, thinking about feminism as a matter of everyday life as opposed to, some kind of abstract philosophy or something like that. And there's Chariot aspects to me in Sarah Ahmed's thinking, in that she has done a lot of writing in phenomenology, which has a lot, deals a lot with questions of kind of orienting and what we orient ourselves towards in the world and what we orient ourselves away from in that process. She has an entire book about this. And I love this very much. I love this book very much. I'm seeing if there's a nice quote that that I can share. This book is full of quotes that I could share. Maybe I'll talk about this book more in another video. I'm really trying to make good time. I'm really trying to make good time as I look at the pile of books over there. But suffice to say, when I think about, steering myself through the world, this is a big one for me. She's coming out with another book this year, very, very soon. Another feminist book that I'm very, very excited about. This is extraordinary, and if you can find, Sarah Ahmed giving a talk or something on YouTube, like, find it. She's brilliant. That is The Chariot for me. Now, strength. Clearly in this section of the cards, I ended up in this room because that's where all the philosophy books live, is this set of shelves here. The strength card, which for me, for the purpose of this video, I put at number 8, obviously. It could be number 11, but it's number 8 for this. My strength book is Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison by Michel Foucault. And this one was a book that, unlocked a lot of things for me when I read it many, many, many years ago. I probably first encountered this book in school in maybe 2007-ish, back then, back in the undergrad times. And this book is all about power and different forms of power and shifts in regimes of power. And a lot of what Foucault does in this book is think about the history of penal reform, I guess. The birth of the prison, right? That kind of history of state, the sanctioned punishment, and the different forms it's taken, in particular, like Western context anyway. And think about this kind of shift from, very public, physically violent punishments to behind, closed doors kinds of punishments that focused, at least ostensibly, on, at times, the spirit as opposed to the body, right? Trying to reform people. And he gets into this kind of trying to think about different models of power that let us talk about power relations in ways that are not just this kind of top-down, the king can execute the subject kind of power, right? Thinking about power relations, thinking about power in the context of things like surveillance, thinking about the ways in which surveillance as a form of power can be internalized such that people police themselves in accordance to particular kinds of norms. Like this was the book that gave me some kind of vocabulary to talk about that. And so, thinking about strength, I feel like is a card that is often talked about as, this is a kind of strength and power that isn't just force or isn't just physical force, led me immediately to here. So that's why that's my book for strength. For the Hermit, literal, for this one, I went Nietzsche, thus spoke Zarathustra, because thinking about like a book on my shelves somewhere that depicts a hermit of sorts, depicts a hermit who, goes away into the mountains and then comes down to address the people, who speaks in ways that are not clear, who speaks in ways that are multi-layered and complicated, and certainly have been subject to a lot of misinterpretation. In these kind of bursts of thought, this aphorism style that this book is written in, made me think of the Hermit. So that's a very literal one. Zarathustra is a hermit. Number 10, the Wheel. The Wheel, I thought about, the Wheel of Fortune cards that depict, the king going around and kind of the king at the peak of ruling and then declining and then, at the bottom of the wheel and then coming back to, will be the ruler and is the ruler, going around the Wheel of Fortune. And that one led me to a novel, which I love, called She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is a part one of a duology. The second one is coming out. It can't possibly come out soon enough because I fucking love this novel. And I think it also speaks to the ways in which the Wheel of Fortune card can deal with this kind of interplay of agency and fate and trying to control one's destiny versus kind of not swimming against the current, so to speak, and kind of allowing things to unfold. You know, this is set in the mid-1300s in China, and you know, in the very beginning of the story, this is not too much of a spoiler because it's right at the start, the main character claims their brother's destiny for themselves after their brother dies. And so it kind of takes the brother's place. And so this whole kind of theme of destiny throughout this book that reminds me of The Wheel of Fortune. Next, Justice. Another possibly, you know, in the top most influential, most important books to me that I could think of. 2-volume autobiography, Living My Life by Emma Goldman. You know, Emma Goldman was an anarchist thinker who was born in 1969. She died in 1940. She, you know, was an immensely active and effective theorist, author, organizer, agitator, commentator, you know, who had roles in some pretty major developments, who was very well known, at least for part of her life, globally. And, you know, she wrote so much on justice and, you know, what justice might be and what that might look like, and the importance of fighting towards it, and, you know, the ways in which what some people call the justice system, a criminal legal system, is deeply, profoundly, and fundamentally not justice. And I recommend this autobiography very much. It is quite long. It's very readable. This is my justice book. This was a very easy pick for me. Jumped out immediately. For the hanged man, hanged person, I chose a related figure in anarchist history, and that is Alexander Berkman, and Alexander Berkman's prison memoirs specifically. And Alexander Berkman, you know, was also a author, organizer, less prolific of an author, though wrote lots of personal correspondence, certainly. And he was a longtime partner of Emma Goldman as well. And he writes these prison memoirs when he is in jail in the United States for an attempted assassination. He goes through tremendous, I think, political transformation here and philosophical transformation here in this like quite long prison sentence that totally changes his outlook on a lot of different things. He learns a lot from the people who he's in with. And I think he, you know, so thinking about the hanged one as both a card that maybe historically refers to punishment, right? But also that we think of in terms of this perhaps imposed pause and reorienting one's thinking. I think that Berkman I can associate with the hanged man in this book. This is an important one too. I have written about this book. Next up, death. I go back to the fiction shelf as of now, and now I have a whole bunch of fiction in a row, and then I bounce around a little bit at the end, just to tell you what's coming up. For death, I picked a fabulous novel, Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. This is the first in a trilogy. It won the Hugo, the Nebula, the Arthur C. Clarke, the Locus, and the BSFA. So this is really good. It's the beginning of a trilogy. There's also a couple of other books, one that is coming out next month, I think, that are kind of set in the same universe but aren't directly part of the same storyline. And so what does this have to do with death? It's a science fiction. If it's not really obvious from the ships on the front, it's science fiction. What this relates to death. The main character in this book is Breck, and Breck is an ancillary. And what this means in the context of the book, ships, like large spaceships, have consciousnesses, and they take on human bodies, which they make kind of cyborg connections to, and those are the ancillaries. And so the kind of ship consciousness can be in hundreds of places at once in all of these different ancillaries when they're all, fighting or doing something, right? It sounds it is as horrifying as it sounds. And Breck is one ancillary left alone who gets disconnected from the ship. And so thinking about death, not as a literal death per se, but this kind of complete and total rupture, a complete and total end of something that was absolutely fundamental to who one is and how one lives and how one understands the world, is all of a sudden completely gone. That speaks to the death card to me. So that's why I picked this book. I'm really excited to read Translation State, which is the next book that's coming out. I have a copy of it already. I'm very excited. Temperance. This is one of the less literal ones. The Best of All Possible Worlds by Karen Lord. This is another science fiction. And this one is related to temperance for me because there's definitely themes of harmony and disharmony, bringing about harmony through different kinds of interactions, certainly. It follows two closely related species. It's very humans and Vulcans, like very, very humans and Vulcans like. And the more Vulcan ones, the Sidiri, there are very few of them left. Their planet is attacked, and only the ones that are off the planet make it. And so they are kind of meeting different kind of other groups that they're very, very closely related to. And, there's a lot about identity in this book. There's a lot about thinking about what is absolutely kind of fundamental to identity in this book. And thinking about, I actually thought of, the temperance, and then I thought about temper, and then I thought about tempering. And, I've said one of the species reminds me a lot of Vulcans. So there's a lot of this kind of conversation around kind of emotion and expression and tempering one's expression. And so that made me think of temperance. It's perhaps the least obvious of the books that I've picked, but there it is. It's really good, I thought. Next up, a very literal choice that needs, no explanation. The Devil, card 15, The Master and the Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is the first novel that I could think of that depicts the devil. Or the first book in my house that I could think of that actually has a depiction of a devil in it. There's behemoth on the front. So this has a representation of Satan in it. So that's why I picked, for the devil, more so than any, necessarily themes, though I think those connections could be made. For the Tower, I picked 2. It's the only one that I picked 2, and it's because I have 2 novels that I really like that have a tower in them. One I just read, Babel by R.F. Kuang, which I've talked about in a recent monthly recap video. And this tower houses the School of Translation at Oxford in this magical fantasy novel. And then also I picked Damnificados by J.J. Amawara Wilson, which is a kind of magical realist story, which I really like, that's based on the Tower of David, which is in Caracas, Venezuela. Was a tower that kind of got squatted, basically, like taken over, and a kind of non-hierarchical community of sorts emerges inside the tower. So these are very different towers and very different aspects of the tower card in terms of the oppressiveness of a tower that needs to be toppled versus what can be built. So they both, I think, tie into the tower card. Babel, perhaps more obviously of the two, but they both have towers, and I had to put them both because they're both really excellent. The Star. I chose Cruising Utopia, The Then and There of Queer Futurity by Jose Esteban Munoz. This book is hope to me. This book is, a theoretical kind of engagement with hope. It's future oriented. It's a guide for sure. It looks at kind of twist LGBTQ plus culture, in such interesting future oriented ways that I find really inspiring. He says at the end of the book that this is a call to think about our lives and times differently, to look beyond a narrow version of the here and now on which so many around us who are bent on the normative count. Utopia in this book has been about an insistence on something else, something better, something dawning. For this book as a resource for the political imagination. The text is meant to serve as something of a flight plan for a collective political becoming, and just like demanding a queer future. And so this is the hopefulness of the Star for me. The Moon card, I went with a novel, and I went in, a direction with the Moon card that's not usually the one that I emphasize when I talk about the Moon card, the more kind of shadowy, mysterious aspects of the Moon card that can be very, very unsettling and scary. I picked This Census Taker by China Mieville. It's a novella, really. This is brilliant. I love this. And the reason that this book reminds me of the Moon card is because if you can imagine a novel that feels like it's written in a kind of moonlight, it's not clear. It is mysterious. Very little is revealed. The things that are revealed, you get glimpses of things, but you don't get the full image of anything. And there's a lot of things that throughout the vast majority or even all of the book are not really illuminated fully. And the result is extremely unsettling, uncomfortable, scary at points, certainly, but really enticing and compelling. Then that's this book. Definitely horror of sorts. Very, very strange. This is like nothing else I've ever read. I have to reread this by a brilliant author. That is my Moon book. For the Sun, I chose Nature's Year in the Kawarthas, a guide to the unfolding seasons. As a druid, we follow a kind of solar calendar of holidays, of solstices and equinoxes. Associations with the seasons are important to my practice. Observing what my environment is doing at different times of the year is an important part of my everyday life. And this book basically looks at what's going on in the plant and animal and weather worlds where I live throughout the year. And this book has been a very illuminating book for me, thinking of the sun, because it It has helped me learn the names of many of my non-human neighbors, and it's helped me to see things that, you know, have been around me and are around me in new ways, and to pay more and better attention. And that is joyful, you know, and so it goes with the Sun card as a joyful book as well. Getting to the end, for Judgment, this one leapt off the shelf at me immediately for Judgment. That's De Profundis by Oscar Wilde. This is Oscar Wilde's letter to Lord Alfred Douglas, written from prison when Oscar Wilde is in jail for gross indecency with said Lord Alfred Douglas. And this has to do with judgment very directly, I think. Much of the first part of this is very much a judgment of Alfred Douglas's behavior, and Wilde criticizes all of these things about Lord Alfred Douglas and how he's been superficial, and he hasn't helped him with his work, and he's put him you know, in all these kind of situations, and he's been demanding, and it's really a judgment in that sense. But then it also very much deals with the kind of spiritual transformation of Oscar Wilde himself through this like horrifying experience in prison at a time when most people who came out of prison sentences as long as the one that he had like didn't make it another year once they were out, right? And so there's so much that relates to the Judgment card in this one. So this is a special one. De Profundis by Oscar Wilde, definitely the Judgment book for me. And ending it off to the world, I chose again easily Pantheologies, Gods, Worlds, and Monsters by Mary Jane Rubenstein. And, you know, the beginning of the jacket inside, pantheism is the idea that God and the world are identical, that the creator, sustainer, destroyer, and transformer of all things is the universe itself. From a monotheistic perspective, this notion is irredeemably heretical because it suggests divinity might be material, mutable, and multiple. And, you know, this is the world. This is the world as sacred. And this book has been a very, you know, influential one for me since I read it. It's one that I've now chosen to reread. I put it on my Druid curriculum for my apprentice reading, so I'm going to be reading it again, and I'm excited to read it again. This is my world book, my sacred universe book. So that's why I chose Pantheologies as my book for the world card. That is all of the majors, books for the majors. Thank you to Lennan for starting the tag. I had a lot of fun, you know, going around my house and picking these books, and I hope that more folks will participate in the tag, because at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books, I really like when tarot and books are brought together in conversation. Share with me in the comments if you have any book card pairings that come to mind immediately for you. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.